Hey everyone, Pete Calandra here, and on today's video, we're going to be taking a look at a new reverb plugin by a company called Half-Light, and the name of the plugin is Taped Spaces. And this is a very interesting and useful take on reverb in that they've taken the reverb sound from hardware units and processed it with tube distortions and reel-to-reel recordings. In the process, created these different modes of reverb. And this is the GUI right here. You can access the different modes from right here. And then it's just got some basic but very useful tools here for shaping the sound. So you access these by turning them on. I got a low cut. And you'll notice that it tells you the frequency when you hover. High cut, length, mix, and then the output level. And each one of these different modes has a different character and a different type of processing. What I would recommend you do if you want to learn more about these different reverb modes is to just go to the Half-Light website and you can read all about it, or you can download the manual. What we're going to do is go through a bunch of different audio files that I've got here: a soprano sax, tempo bowl, piano, acoustic guitar, synthesizer, cello. I've got an acoustic cello recording, all sorts of stuff. And we will see how we can use the very characterful nature of taped spaces to shape the sound. The first example we have here is a tempo bowl, and it's just a couple of hits, and we'll hear it dry, and then we'll hear it with the processing. Okay, so the signal I have is wearing thin, and I've got that on Ascend here in Pro Tools, so let me unmute that. Now, one really cool thing about that is there's this really beautiful bloom that happens with the reverb afterwards, and it adds sort of a haunting quality to the tempo bowl. What I want to show you next is that you can also add processing, of course, after the taped spaces, and I've got the Supermassive here, and we'll listen to this, add it on, and we'll hear what that does to the sound. And you can hear how the sound comes in after the attack. It really almost gives you sort of like a pre-delay and some more reflections. What I'll do now is I will go pre-fader and I will mute the dry sound, and we can just listen to the sound of the taped spaces, and then we'll play it again and we'll listen to the sound of the taped spaces with the Supermassive. What I like with the Supermassive is it sort of diffuses that bloom, and it makes this really complex, wet sound that just goes on and on. It's really beautiful. Now, the other things that you can do, if you'd like, is that you can also sound design the sound that's going in to the reverb. So let's do this and make a band pass. And we'll make it really sharp. And let's listen to the combination of the taped spaces and the Valhalla, and we can have both of those open along with our EQ. All right, let's take a listen to this. Yeah, really interesting, right? So that's kind of a cool usage. Let's move on. And the next bit, we've got the great Antonio Hart playing soprano on one of my songs. So I just took the audio file, and we're using this time the Luft, which is the very first reverb here. So let's listen to a little bit of the dry signal, and then we'll put the taped spaces in. Here we go. Really interesting, right? Let's get this a little bit closer to where it was. And now we'll listen to a different example. Same thing, soprano sax. Here we go. Now, this is a lower pitched passage compared to this first one, and you can hear how the reverb processes that. And we can add a little bit more high frequencies if we'd like, and we can cut some of the low end if we'd like. Let's listen to that. Yeah, I love the way it sounds. There's just a sort of a something about the sound that's really appealing to me. All right, so next we've got my friend David Weiss, who is in The Lion King, and this is a wooden flute that he's playing on a track of mine. So we'll listen to it with the taped spaces, and this signal here is we're using the pianist. I don't have anything turned on here. Everything is default sound, and we'll play around with a few things. So let's take a listen to this. Now, that's really nice, but there's a little bit of a mid-frequency honk. And one thing I think would be really nice, it's the way this is set up, it's really beautiful and elegant and clean. And you can always do this after the fact. But on this particular signal, I like to cut out a little bit of the mid-frequencies, well, more than a little, minus 6 dB of the reverb. I think that'll sound cleaner. So let's take a listen to that. Yeah, I think it's much nicer with just a little bit of this mid-frequency dip. Depending upon the EQ you use, you might need less of this, right? With this particular EQ, the built-in Pro Tools, I find I have to make a little bit more dramatic cuts or boosts to get the effect that I want. With other EQs, depending upon what they're modeling, you might find that you only need, for a passage like this, just a little bit of the cut in the mid-frequencies. Let's see what happens if we really blow out the length of this and make it really ambient. So let's take a listen to that. Really beautiful. Before we go on to the next example, if you like this video, give a thumbs up. For more content, please subscribe, and to be notified, ring that bell. There'll be timestamps for all these examples in the description box, and leave any comments. I'd love to know your thoughts on this particular plugin. Okay, so the next bit we've got here is some Bach played by a graduate student at Queens College, where I teach, CUNY, City University of New York, and we recorded her with an XY configuration on the microphones, and we were using a pair of Neumann K184 microphones, and this is fairly close mic'd in the studio. So let's take a listen to this, and then I'm going to EQ the cello part a little bit, but we'll listen to a little bit of this and then take a listen to it with the taped spaces. Very good player. let's take a look at see what I do with the EQ. Right, so what I did here was I made this a little bit lo-fi. But it also has a little bit of a mid-range honk in it, which I find with those mics you get on acoustic instruments. So I dipped that down a little bit here also. So we took out the bandpass filter that I created, and let's listen to it here with this signal and this processing just a little bit, and then we'll go right to the reverb. On this one, we're using the Moon chamber, and I haven't done anything to the signal. It's just as it comes, but we'll play around with the signal as we're listening. Really interesting. Let's bring the EQ back in and listen to it, and I'll play around with this bandpass and see how much of a lo-fi sound we can make. All right, so you can play around with all sorts of stuff, but it's got a really nice character on an instrument like this with just, let's take out the EQ completely and listen to it. Really nice, clean tails. I don't hear any weird fluttering that you hear sometimes with some reverbs. It's got a really smoothish tail to it, which I really appreciate. This next example is me playing my Yamaha S7X acoustic piano, and I'm using the Earthworks piano mic system recorded directly into the Mix Pre 10 recorder, brought into here, so it's close mic'd. And we'll listen to a little bit of the acoustic piano, and then I've got some EQ, which I'll bring in, and then we'll listen to the taped spaces. So let's bring this up here. Okay, so at that point I was fooling around with the controls, which you can all see, and interesting, to make the length much shorter, it almost becomes like an ambience, right? So I'm wondering what would happen if I put another instance of taped spaces after that with a little bit longer decay. So let's try that. And you can always see which parameter or which treatment I'm using. It's written right here. So I'm going to the soft sky, which actually I believe is the longest reverb in the of all these different signals. So let's try that. Interesting, not liking that too much. Well, let's go to the pianist. Yeah, interesting signal. We'll try another piano bit here. And this one I've got some treatments on. So we'll listen to the sound dry, and then I'll show you some of the treatments as the sound is playing. Let's look at taped spaces. So I'll be using the sleeper car for this. But we'll first hear it dry, then I'll bring in the sleeper car, and then we'll try some of these other effects to create this really interesting piano texture I came up with. Here we go. All right, so you can create some really interesting timbres. I was getting a little bit into the sound of some Eno Bud collaboration, even though my playing isn't really anything like Harold Budd in that example. Now, this next bit is a resonator guitar, and I'm playing some slide on this. So let's see, what kind of space do I have on this? Wearing thin. All right, let me mute this, and then I'll bring it in. And then we'll bring in some of these other effects. All right, going for the Lowell George 2 compressor thing on the slide guitar. Kind of cool. Let's move on. Our last two examples are featuring some Moog. So I believe they're both from my Siren. Let's try and listen to this. No, that is from the Mini Moog. I can tell by the number of oscillators. Okay, so the taped spaces that I'm using here is Soft Sky. Let's take a listen with some of that in here. So that's kind of a cool sound. I'm going to add a few effects after the taped spaces. So the first one I'm going to add is the real ADT from Waves, and this is from their Abbey Road, I believe, suite. So we're just listening to the reverb sound right now. I've got this going pre-fader. It's nice. The tape spaces plays well with other time-based effects. And then I added the Moog filter towards the end there. And then last, this one is definitely the Siren. And this is sort of like ring modulation or sample and hold or something like that. It's a weird little sound. And we'll go through the sleeper car again. So let's take a listen to this one with no reverb and then with the reverb in. All right, that one takes you right back to the 1950s with Morton Subotnick or whoever you'd like to think of at that time, sort of like academic electronic music studio sounds. But really, that you can achieve that is kind of cool. So there you have it, the Half-Light Taped Spaces Reverb. We live in a great time as composers where we have tools available to us for reasonable amounts of money where we can create virtually any kind of sound we want inside the computer. As someone who in high school learned how to do this stuff on a 4-track TAC, and then in the 1980s with a Porta Studio 244, and then through the development of MIDI and all this, the amount of money it costs you to do this once you have a laptop or any kind of computer to create any kind of sound, whether it's an acoustic sound from recording, whether it's electronic sounds using virtual synths and everything, and all sorts of processing. It's so beneficial. And once you learn how to use these things and put them into your own creativity, you can come up with really great sounds. So I really like this particular piece of software. It's not for everything, but when you want to add some sort of character in your reverb, it's a great option. I've been Pete Calandra. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.